Today in our Botanical Art Making series, we're going to focus on nature printing. And so it's using what we find outside in our potted plants and even in our fridge to create some really wonderful prints. What I love about this process is that you don't have to draw anything. You don't have to cut anything out. You don't have to create a stamp or design. You're literally inking up an already made item. And what's really cool about that is that you can get so much wonderful detail in this process. We're going to focus our main supply on acrylic paint, but we're going to talk about some other things too. But to start off, I wanted to show some examples of how our nature prints might turn out, and also talk about some of the best materials to use in this printing process. Some of the best material to use is going to be the freshest you can get, right? So the fresher your natural material is, the better it is for printing. As the natural material, like the leaves or the flowers, as they dry, they get a little brittle. And so you don't always get a nice transfer, a nice print. So you want something that's fresh. What I do is I'll go collect some natural material and then put it in a little cup of water so it stays fresh right up until I need it. Now, you can use dry materials, but the thing is, you may not always get prints from that or like full prints. It may break a little bit. So that's just something to keep in mind. With fresh material, you can use that same leaf or flower over and over and over again, which is really nice. So you can make multiple prints from it. Using dried material usually only gives you one, maybe two prints. So the fresher the material is, the better. The next thing that's really important when it comes to finding natural material to use for printing is thinking about shape or texture. Right? And so what do I mean by that? First, I have a little hydrangea leaf here. This one kind of has, a basic leaf shape, your typical leaf shape. But what's really interesting about this is that it has a lot of veining in there. So when I print it, I get a whole lot of detail. There's something that's really nice about seeing all that amazing detail come up. Now, not everything has a whole lot of detail, has a lot of veining or texture. Sometimes it's just a pretty solid shape. This is a eucalyptus leaf, and you can see it's not that interesting in a shape, but it has several shapes, like it's several pieces. So there's something interesting in the shape of it. Looking at this Swiss cheese monstera, again, it's that basic leaf shape, which is not always that fascinating. But what's really cool about this one is that you have these holes that are in the leaf that provide some type of texture. And again, you see that veining and texture inside the leaf. Right? Now, if you don't have something that has a lot of texture to it, it's kind of fun to think about things that have multiple leaves to them. Like this, for example. Here's another type of eucalyptus there. And so you can see it's got a lot of leaves, even though they're flat and they don't have a lot of texture to them. You can see all the little shapes building up. This is sage. Sage is something that we don't think about printing because it's kind of fuzzy and soft. Which is weird to think about herbs being fuzzy, but it is a little fuzzy in texture. And so you get this really cool design from it because of that fuzziness. And you also get multiple leaves. So even though it's a basic shape, because of the texture, because of the number, you get some really cool designs from it. And then, of course, here I'm using thyme. Thyme has teeny tiny leaves that don't really transfer a lot of texture, but because there's so many of them, you get this kind of fun look to it. Now, nature printing is something that you can do just to make a print that you hang on the wall. They're very cool. They're very neat looking just the way they are. But nature printing is something I use in a lot of other ways as well. I'll print on nice paper and use it as a book cover when I do some bookbinding. When I wrap a gift, if it's a plain craft paper, like a plain brown paper, a plain white paper, I'll do some nature printing on that gift. So it kind of adds some design to it. And it's kind of that little bit of a handmade element. So This type of nature printing you can use for a lot of things. One of the things I also want to kind of talk about before we move into our making is like one of the things we don't see here are flowers. Flowers can be a little tricky when it comes to nature printing. I'm going to show how to do it today, but I will say the best flowers to use for printing are going to be tiny ones like these here, or ones that have a flat surface, kind of like this dandelion or a daisy or a sunflower, chamomile, something like that. When you have something that's very like round, like a rose or a peony, those are a little harder to print because of the volume. But using something that has that flat, like a somewhat flat surface, you can still get a nice print from that. And I'll walk through how to do that too. But I just wanted to kind of show some examples of how our prints may turn out, and talk a little bit about the natural material. Now, when we think of natural material, as I mentioned before, we think about like plants that are outside or going to the grocery store and getting some flowers or flower shop. And those are great options. You can definitely do that too. But you can also go into your fridge. Some of my favorite things to print are things like herbs. They just have a really cool texture to them. I've also printed some lettuce leaves before. And like the tops of carrots. So you can get really clever with some of the stuff that you get or that you can print with as well. And if you're ever uncertain, will this print well? Is this a good shape? I always recommend trying it. You never know. And even if it doesn't turn out the way you see it in your head, it's a great background for another art project, right? So save all those extra pieces because you can use them for other things. I want to talk a little more about supplies. So the first thing we need, of course, is going to be our natural materials. So I have a variety of things here with me today, and I'm going to kind of walk through some tips on how to do printing with a lot of them. So I have like a peony leaf. I have some fern, I think this is parsley, dandelion, and then some sort of weeds. Even weeds can be really cool in a nature print. Let's just say that. So whatever supplies, natural materials you have, go ahead and pull those out. The next thing I want to talk about is our paper. Now, I love this type of printing because you can use some nice printing paper, but you can also use some basic copy paper or printer paper. And you can also use like old artwork or found pieces. I have here a dictionary page that I actually colored yesterday, that I can use in this process. So I've got a couple different materials here to use for printing on top of. Now, when it comes to the best paper to use, it really is open to whatever you have. I would say in all the nature printing that I have done, there's not one paper that really feels better or does better than another, because every paper that I've tried has a cool print to it. I've used scrapbooking paper, I've used watercolor paper, I've used tissue paper, I've used craft paper, I've printed on foil, I've printed on terracotta, I've printed on wood. You can also print on fabric. I've done prints on tea towels and tote bags and aprons. So you can use this process. If you have fabric paint, you can paint on all sorts of fabric with this process too. So there's a lot of surfaces that you can use to print on top of. I'm going to be using a variety of papers today, but feel free to experiment with some other paper materials as well. Now, the next supply we want to kind of focus on is our paint. So I've got a couple different options here of acrylic paint. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. Now you can use other materials to print. I've got some little acrylic paint that came in these little sets, I guess. And then I've got some other acrylic paint used for actual paintings, bigger paintings. So I'm going to use both of them in our process today. But any type of acrylic paint works. If you have something that's really thin, like a watery acrylic paint, that works. If you have something that's like a thicker, heavier body paint, that also works. It's not really that one is better than the other. They both have different looks to them. And so there's like something nice about using both of them. So know that whatever like acrylic paint you have, it will work for this process. And then the last thing, supply I want to talk about is the way we're applying our pigment. So I'm going to use a brayer and I'm going to use a paintbrush. So feel free to use whichever one you have or use both of them. The paintbrush I'm using is just a wide flat brush. Really, any type of paintbrush will work for this. And then I'm using a brayer. If you've done any printmaking before, you've had experience with a brayer. This is kind of the main tool of the printmaker. It's used for inking up plates and creating those prints from. So I'll be using both of those today. And again, if you have just one or if you have both, feel free to experiment and try them out. They both do different types of the prints, paint coverage. Now, the last thing I want to mention is, we'll talk about this too, I'll show how to use it. But you can also, even though we're focusing on acrylic paint today, you can also use a stamp pad for this process. So there's very like basic materials that you can use too. Even if you don't have acrylic paint, if you have access to a stamp pad, this also works. So let's get started in our process. I'm going to start off by walking through how to use our brayer. One of the main things we want to kind of pay attention to is preparing our workspace. So I almost always work off a piece of foil. It's just easier for me to kind of contain my mess. You don't have to use a piece of foil. If you have wax paper, if you have a disposable tablecloth, a drop cloth, newspaper, even a piece of cardboard or a paper plate, it all works. Whatever you have is good. This process isn't super messy, but accidents do happen. So it's always good to kind of prepare our space. And then, of course, preparing our body too. Like I said, sometimes accidents happen. So it is always good to wear an apron or clothes you don't mind getting a little messy. And you can see already with my hands, I got a little messy earlier. So you could get a little messy with it. If you're using acrylic paint for the first time, know that it's okay if you get it on your skin. It comes off with a little soap and water and it won't stain. So you can wear disposable gloves if you want, or just kind of wash it off with a little soap and water later. To start off, one of the things I want to kind of walk through is having a piece of scrap paper. We'll basically need two pieces of, or one piece basically, of scrap paper. Now, when we create our prints, we're going to be using that scrap paper to kind of press into it for our paintbrush. And then for our brayer, we'll just be using two pieces of paper. Now, I'm going to walk through both processes, but it's always good to have that piece of scrap paper close to help kind of keep things clean and protect our prints a little bit. Okay. To start off, I'm going to add my pigment. We're starting with our brayer. I'm going to add my pigment to this little piece of foil here. And I'm going to start off with some, I'm just going to do black. I think that's easiest to see on the screen. So I'm doing kind of a large blueberry sized dollop, right? So when you're using a brayer, if you've never used a brayer before, one of the things that you want is a nice even coat across this kind of rubber. To do that, we'll take our brayer over the pigment, we'll move it up and down and then back and forth, up and down and back and forth. And so what that does is it covers our brayer with a nice even thin layer. So I'm just going to take my brayer and kind of move it up and down and back and forth, up and down and back and forth. And so you can see now I've got that nice even coat across the top. Now I'm going to start off by using my fern leaf here. And we want to make sure that if you have it in a little cup of water, you give it a little dab with a paper towel to just kind of dry it off. But I've got my piece of fern here, and I'm going to use this piece of paper to print on today. So I'm going to use that as my first print, and I'm going to use a piece of some nice printing paper. So if you're using a brayer, you can actually print on two pieces at the same time. Now, for a fern, it's not that important, but one of the things I want to point out is the side of your natural material that has the most texture. Most of the time, that's going to be the back. It's going to be the underside of the leaf. With the fern leaf, it's not that important, right? Because you have a lot of detail, just a lot of little leaves. But for this leaf, for example, this is a peony leaf. You can see on the back of it, there's a lot of veining. This is the main part that I want to ink up because this is what's going to give me a lot of that detail. Okay? So when it comes to inking up our natural material, that's one of the things we want to think about. Okay? So to do my fern, what I'm going to do is just come over to my little paper here, my paint tray, and with my brayer, now that I have it covered in pigment, I'm just going to take my brayer and do a gentle roll up and down. The truth is, we're not wanting to cover it completely with pigment. We're wanting to cover that texture, right? So I'm just going to kind of give it a roll, a gentle roll up and down, and then flip it over and do the same thing. That gentle roll up and down. Again, not wanting to cover it completely, right? But just covering that texture. So we're focusing on that stem and we're focusing on the outline of the leaf. Right? So once I have it covered in pigment, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put my scrap paper down and then put the paper that I'm printing on down. Figure out where I want my piece to be. So I'm going to do it like this. We'll gently lay it down. Right? I'm not pressing, I'm just gently laying it down where I want it to be. And then I'll take another piece of paper and place it on top, gently set. And then with one hand, I'm going to hold that top paper still. And with my other hand, I'm going to kind of gently rub, just a little pressing. We want to make sure that we're using one hand to hold it still while we're doing that movement. Because the truth is, if we don't hold it still, it'll there's a chance we can move it. And so we'll get kind of a shaky image. So holding it still, having one hand hold it still is good. I'm doing a little press. And once I think I've pressed everything, I'll gently peel it up. Now, here's the thing. We want to take a peek. You don't have to pull it up right away. What we can do is take a little peek to make sure things transfer. So I'm going to take my paper. I'm still holding my hand in one place so it doesn't move and lift it up. And I can see I've got some good transfer. So I'll peel it up all the way. So I have one print. I can lift my leaf up and I have my other print here. So when you're using a brayer, you can get a double print. Okay? So it's inking up both sides, laying our natural material down, and then taking another piece and pressing it on top. Now this gives us two prints, so it's like two for the price of one, right? So you get, not that it costs anything, but you get two prints that are mirror image of each other almost. It's the front and the back of our natural material, right? And then of course, because I had that scrap paper down, you can see my leaf kind of overlap the edge of the paper. And so now that's protected. That's good. I still have that nice print. So I'm going to set that aside, let it dry. I'm going to do another little print. Now this leaf I can use over and over and over again. I don't have to throw it away. It's not a one and done type thing. It is something I can use over and over again. I'm going to talk about how to do it with a paintbrush, right? So I'm going to bring my little paintbrush in here. And this is where that scrap paper again is going to be, is going to come in handy, right? So I'm going to take my fern leaf. I'm using the same leaf I just did. And if you're doing a paintbrush, you don't always get the two-sided print. You can by inking up both sides. But if you're only doing one side with your natural material, I will always recommend using the back side because that's where most of that detail is. Right, where those veins are, where that texture is. So I'm going to take my brush here and I'm just going to kind of go in the paint that I have here and get some on my brush. And then with one hand, I'm just going to hold my natural material, my fern leaf down. And then with my paintbrush, just kind of brush it across. Now, again, we're not wanting to cover the whole surface. We're just wanting to cover that texture. So I'm just kind of adding with my paintbrush, making sure I'm getting the stem, those veins, the outside edge of my leaves, my natural material. Okay. So I've got one side that's really good. I'm going to set my scrap paper aside here. Pull out another piece of paper. Now, since I painted the back of my leaf, I'm going to flip it over so it's face down. The ink side is on the paper, right? And then I can take my scrap paper and just kind of press. Again, using one hand to hold it still while the other hand is doing the pressing. And we want to make sure that we touch every place that has paint on it, right? Because it's transferring because of pressure. And so everywhere we press, we want that paint will transfer. So once you've pressed it, you think you've done a good job with it, it's always good to take a little peek. So I'm going to lift it up, still use one hand to hold it still, and just take a little peek. Yeah, and I've got some good transfer. So I'm just going to very carefully lift up my scratch paper. And then very carefully lift up my leaf. And I've got a really nice print. Again, because we're using that underside of the leaf, you start to see a little bit of the veining. With a fern, it's tiny leaves, so it's hard to see the veining, but you see all that wonderful shape, right? And then that stem going down. So that's one way to do it with your brayer and with your paintbrush. Now I want to talk about how to do a flower. Now I have a couple options here. When you're doing something that is flat, like this dandelion here, let me pull this up. Not a dandelion, a fake dandelion. It's got that somewhat flat surface. And this one too. Let me pull this. I'm going to pull this one off. So this here is a small version, but it has a somewhat flat surface, so it's going to be a little easier to do a transfer print. So again, what we want to do is get the pigment on it so we can transfer it to our paper. And this is good for any size flower that you're doing. If you're doing a daisy, if you're doing a sunflower, if you're doing a mum, a dandelion, chrysanthemums, chamomile, all of those, you do the same process. But what we want to do is ink up the top and the back. And we can do that with our brayer. We can also do that with our paintbrush. So I'm going to add a tiny bit more pigment to my paint tray here. And then with my brayer, just kind of up and down and back and forth. Up and down and back and forth. This gives us that smooth, even coat. So when we have our flower, and I've got a tiny one here, what I'm going to do is take the top of my flower, if you're using a brayer, and set it down, face down, the flat side down, flat-ish side down. And then with my brayer, I'm going to come up to the stem and pull away from it. Now we want to be gentle with it. We don't want to be aggressive, aggressive brayer users. But I'm just going to kind of take my brayer and roll it out. See, getting a little ink and roll it out. And just kind of pull it out. And naturally, you're going to get some pigment on the underside. But once you get that pigment on the flower, the back of the flower, then we can pick that up and lay it down. So I can take very gently with my brayer, take it and just kind of carefully roll it across the surface. And it may take a minute to get all that, right? I should have found something a little bigger than this one. So I have my pigment on there. So now I can come back over to my paper here. I'm going to use this one that I just printed. I'm going to take my flower, and again, I'm going to put it face side down. Okay. And then with my scrap paper, I'm going to take my scrap paper and very carefully set it on top. This has volume to it. So we really want to make sure we're using one hand to hold it still while the other hand is gently pressing. And then we can carefully lift it up. And you can use your flower print over and over again. If you do have like mine, well, here's the other print that turned out really well. If you have your flower that kind of turned out like mine did, where part of it got left on the paper, it's okay to leave it there. Once it dries, you can brush it off pretty easily. But that's how to get a flower. And again, you can do it with your paintbrush, you can do it with the brayer, but you still want to do kind of that same process, gently painting the top. So I'll walk through it with the paintbrush too. So I have my chamomile here. I'm going to take some of my paint and I'm just going to kind of paint the surface. Again, it's not painting, covering the whole thing with pigment, but it's covering that texture. So I can come back over here, lay it face down. I'm going to use my fancy paper today. And again, use one hand to hold it still while the other hand kind of gently presses. And then we can peel it up. And we have kind of our little print here and our little print here. That's how to do a little flower. Now, mine is falling apart, and that's okay. If yours, for some reason, let's say you were printing and something happened and it broke. So let's say I wanted to do my fern leaf, but I had a leaf come off. So it's like missing its leaf. You can still print it because the truth is no one's going to notice in the print that a piece fell off. I'll show. So I'm going to use my brayer here, kind of cover it up and down and back and forth. And I'm going to cover my fern leaf, gently going up and down, flipping it over, doing the same, up and down. I'm going to use my book page here and just kind of set that fern leaf there. Oh no, where did my leaf go? Oh, it's stuck to the brayer. I'm like, I know I have this leaf here. So I have the leaf that came off. What I want to do is just give it a little roll with that brayer so it's inked up. And then I can just set it in place, right? No one will know that it tore off, right? Just setting it there, it looks like it was meant to be there. Then I can take another piece of paper, right? With my leaf that came off or the flower that came off and just take that paper. Again, one hand to hold it still, the other hand to do a gentle press, a gentle rub. And then when you feel that you've got good coverage, you can kind of take a little peek. And then lift up our leaf here and lift up that last little leaf. And here's the truth of the matter. You can't tell which leaf came off, right? So if it does fall off, if it gets stuck to the brayer or stuck to your paper or it comes off while you're covering it, that's okay. You can just set it back in and no one will ever know that it came off. I do this often with flower petals, like when I'm printing a daisy, sometimes those petals will come off. It doesn't stop me from printing it. I'll still ink it up and print it, but the petal that came off, I'll ink that up separately and just lay it there. And so it doesn't really, no one really knows that the leaf came off. You still get a really nice print. So that's one way to kind of troubleshoot tearing your natural materials or pieces of it falling off. Now, sometimes you may find, like with the little flowers that I was using today, these little flowers, that some of it was coming off on my brayer or on my ink, like my paint tray, I guess. When that happens, it's okay. You may just want to take, sometimes I'll have like a brush that I can like pick it off of or move it out of the way. Other times you can just kind of wipe it. Now, I will say, if you want to change colors and you're using a brayer, you want to go wash it, right? But I know sometimes when we're in the middle of printing, it's really hard to go wash that brayer off before our next print, right? It takes up extra time. So one of the things that I do is I'll keep a wet paper towel close by or like a wet wipe. And so when I'm ready to change color, I'll take my scrap paper here and just take my brayer and roll it across to get off a lot of that excess pigment. It's going to roll it a little bit. So I got that excess pigment off. And then I'll take my wet wipe or wet paper towel and just kind of wipe it off. And I'll use this one over and over again. You don't have to do a new wet wipe or wet paper towel every time. You can use the same one. But what this does is it kind of cleans your brayer so you can use another color. So I'm going to do some green. So I'm going to blend my green with my black here just so I don't have to pull out another piece of foil. But once you clean your brayer, you can take it again and roll it back and forth to get your color. Now with your paintbrush, all you have to do is give it a little wash in a little water, and then you can use another color. To use another color, the next thing I want to talk about, I'm going to be using green for this one, but the next thing I want to talk about is doing multiple things on the same paper, right? So the example I had from earlier is I had a couple different pieces of like herbs, and then what was it? A couple herbs and a eucalyptus. So there are a couple things that are a couple ways to print multiple pieces at one time, right? One of them is to go ahead and ink everything up and print them all at the same time. I think that's the easiest way to do it. So that's what we're going to do right now. Right? So I'm going to take my big piece of paper here that I'm going to print on, and I'm going to go ahead and start inking up all my material, right? So I'm going to do my little parsley leaf here, a little bit of parsley. I'm going to do the fern leaf. And I'm going to do this little bit of a flower. So I'll do these three things. So to start off, again, I'm going to take my brayer or my paintbrush and ink it up. So with my brayer, it's up and down and back and forth, up and down and back and forth. And then I'm going to take my piece of nature and I'm going to gently ink up one side, not covering it completely, flipping it over, inking up the back. And I'm going to just kind of set it where I want it to be. And I'm going to do the same with each of my pieces here. With my little parsley, I'm going to lay it flat. When something is fragile, like your parsley or your flower, you want to be kind of gentle with how you roll it. So sometimes it is like starting in the center and just kind of rolling out. And again, we're not inking up, not turning everything that paint color. We're just kind of inking up the texture. Then I can come over here and just kind of place it where I want it to be. And then do the same with my little flower or herb, right? Gently ink it up. Flip it over and ink it up. And then place it where I want it to be. Once I have my multiple pieces there, let's move this guy over just a little bit. I can take my scrap paper again, here, lay it on top, and that's all three of my pieces at once. Again, using one hand to hold it still, while the other hand does a gentle pressing. It doesn't have to be a hard press, it's a gentle press. But we want to make sure that every part that has pigment is getting pressed into the paper. Then I can carefully lift up my pieces, and you may find that you've got some transfer or that the leaf kind of sticks to one paper or another. And then you have multiple pieces on one paper. Now you can do this one at a time. So if you want to do the fern first and then do your parsley and then do your weed, you can. But I will say, if you're doing one print and then doing another print on top of it, you want to make sure that that first one is dry. If it's not dry, you're going to get some blending. So there are two ways to do it. Doing all at once where you're printing them all at the same time, or printing it one at a time where you're inking it up printing it, letting it dry, and then doing the next one, letting it dry, and then doing the next one. So those are a couple ways to do those prints. Just to kind of walk through again, using your brayer, you can do 2 prints at once, but if you're only printing one side, you want to use the side that has the most texture, right? Because that one's going to give you the most detailed print. We want that nice even coat, and then we can take our material, plant material, ink up one side. And again, we're not focused on covering the whole surface. So for my main piece, that's where I want all that detail. I'm going to put that detail side down and then use that scrap paper, set it on top with one hand, hold it still, and that other hand do that gentle rubbing. And we want to make sure we're pulling it gently because we don't want to tear things. I do want to also mention, I know sometimes we don't have access to a lot of natural material that we can use for this type of printing. You can also do artificial flowers and leaves. And just keep the same thing in mind. You want a cool shape, you want some cool texture. That's going to print well. So you can even do this process with artificial plants as well. And what I love, love, love about this process is that you don't have to create something. Like your leaf or your flower is already made. All we're doing is inking that up and transferring. So definitely have some fun with the printing. Try out different natural materials. Maybe try out your fridge and see what you have in there.
Don't forget, like and subscribe so you can be notified about our future videos.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye, everyone.